And now, finally, I'd like to switch gears from melanoma treatments to supports. I'd like to now introduce Dr. Sanger, because we all know and hope that a melanoma diagnosis is only a part of your life story. And to discuss coping with cancer is our wonderful clinical psychologist here at Tennessee Oncology, Dr. Maureen Sanger. So Dr. Sanger completed graduate school at Vanderbilt and fellowship at MD Anderson Cancer Center. She treats patients with Tennessee Oncology here in Nashville, Tennessee. So she is a phenomenal resource for our patients, and I'm so excited that we all have the opportunity to hear from her tonight. So please welcome Dr. Sanger.
Thank you so much, Dr. McKean, and welcome to all of you. It's my privilege to be with you today. And let me pull up my slides here. So I once heard it said that fixing your body can help your mind. Fixing your mind can help your body. And we've heard a lot of important information this evening about ways to tend to the body when dealing with melanoma. I'm going to talk about ways of tending to the mind. And what I'm going to be addressing today is two questions that speak to the ways that living with melanoma affect the mind and strategies for tending to the mind and living well with melanoma. So the impact of cancer on an individual and family can be swift and sweeping, as you all know. So imagine a minute your life as a stage. All the aspects of your life are on that stage: your relationships, your work, your pastimes, your hobbies and interests, the things you value, your accomplishments, and your plans for the future. Then cancer comes along, and now it's on your stage as well. And it tends to grab the spotlight and disrupt other things on your stage. It can feel strange and lonely and isolating at times. So how to put cancer in its place on your stage and while holding on to the other things on your stage is an important task of coping with melanoma, and it's also a very challenging one. The challenges of living with melanoma for both patients and their caregivers are many. There's the physical challenges, things like dealing with medical tests, procedures, treatments that can result in a range of short-term and long-term side effects. For caregivers, that might be fatigue that comes from taking on added responsibilities. There's also emotional challenges. I think this diagnosis, or many people describe a roller coaster of emotions that come up as they deal with this disease, such as anger, sadness, fear, guilt, and grief. And then there's social challenges, changes in roles and responsibilities at work and at home at times, sometimes altering outdoor activities to avoid exposure in the sun, sometimes a shrinking of social activities as more time is directed toward dealing with cancer. I think from the research and from what I experience in talking with many people dealing with cancer is that one of the greatest challenges of dealing with melanoma is living with uncertainty. After a diagnosis of cancer, many people, patients and caregivers alike, feel that life is less secure or predictable than it was before, and that their future is less certain. Some of the uncertainty revolves around concerns during treatment, such as, will the treatment work? How will it affect me? How will it change the way that I look? And living with uncertainty doesn't end when remission is achieved or when treatment ends. That fear of cancer returning is an almost universal worry. And it may spike when it's time for scans or surveillance appointments, or hearing about someone with melanoma, or sometimes even seeing commercials about cancer drugs. And there's the related concerns of, will it spread? If it comes back, will I survive? The uncertainty associated with living with melanoma extends beyond health and prognosis, and it touches many aspects of life for both patients and caregivers. It may affect decisions one makes about jobs, careers, finances, and perhaps even about where one lives, to be closer to family or maybe to a medical center. And it affects future goals and life planning. People with melanoma and their caregivers often describe feeling a lack of control in their lives because they don't know what's going to happen. There can be a sense of life being on hold, of not being able to plan for the future, and therefore sometimes not having things to look forward to. So that living with uncertainty takes a toll on both patients and caregivers, and it often stirs up difficult and hard to manage feelings. Many individuals dealing with melanoma report significant psychological distress or emotional overwhelm, as do their caregivers, as noted in these statistics here. Anxiety and depression are the most common mental health effects, and they're manifested by a range of symptoms that may wax and wane over the course of treatment. And that makes sense. When you have a significant stressor that also feels unpredictable and out of one's control, feelings of anxiety and depression are likely to surface. I think another thing that makes living with melanoma, particularly advanced melanoma, so difficult is not only that it's unpredictable and uncertain, but that it's chronic. When you think about the types of stressors that we typically encounter in day-to-day life, they tend to be short-lived. There may be a deadline at work, or an argument with a partner, or an unexpected home repair. We encounter those day-to-day stressors, we find a way to get through them, we get to the other side of them, and then we can kind of exhale, catch our breath, and relax. But when we're dealing with chronic threat like cancer, our bodies often stay in that fight or flight mode without the opportunity for rest or restoration that we have when the stressors are short-lived. So like a car engine stuck in high gear, over time, that chronic stress can cause wear and tear on bodies, minds, and behavior. And some of the physical effects of chronic stress are body aches and fatigue, muscle tension, jitteriness. Some of the effects on thinking are difficulty focusing and paying attention, having difficulty remembering things, difficulty making decisions, hard time multitasking. And there are effects on behavior as well. In response to chronic stress, oftentimes we might withdraw, or we might lash out. We might procrastinate. We might avoid activities, or sometimes kind of numb ourselves with TV or substances. So given these challenges, how can one live well with cancer? How can we tend to the mind in the face of an unpredictable, unremitting, and life-threatening challenge? The reality is that you can't change the fact that you or a loved one has cancer. And you can't change the fact that melanoma is chronic and unpredictable. But you can make choices about how you respond and live with cancer. And there are some tools that can be helpful with this. And I've summarized some of these strategies using the acronym HELP. But I do want to say that just because these strategies are summarized in a tidy 5-point list doesn't mean that they're easy to do. And it doesn't mean that doing them will eliminate difficult thoughts and feelings. There's no simple set of strategies or a simple recipe for managing the complex task of dealing with melanoma. But these strategies have been shown through research and in practice to increase people's sense of well-being as they deal with cancer. And they are ways of tending to the mind as you go through this disease. So I want to speak to each of them for just a bit. So the H in the acronym is for heeding healthy habits. Now we've all heard that the bedrock of good physical health includes eating a healthy diet, engaging in physical activity, and getting good sleep. But there's a lot of evidence that these good health habits also improve mental health as well. So for example, research shows that physical activity and the flood of endorphins that it produces in the brain reduces anxiety and depression. Sleep is also critical for emotional health. And any of you who have experienced insomnia, as a majority of people who deal with cancer often do, you know that it's harder to function emotionally after a period of not getting good sleep. It's easier to be irritable. Sometimes it's harder to remember things, to focus and concentrate. So sleep does help with mood, thinking skills, and the ability to tolerate stress. Eating well is another health habit that benefits the mind. People who eat a healthy diet tend to have fewer fluctuations in mood. They have fewer symptoms of anxiety and depression, and an improved ability to focus and concentrate. The E in the acronym of health is for emotional expression. And as I've touched on briefly, living with cancer involves dealing with many difficult emotions. And it's a very human tendency to want to avoid, ignore, or distract from these. In addition, we often get messages from others, right, that we should buck up or get a grip or be positive. And this pressure to keep emotions under the lid can actually be detrimental to mental health. So emotions show up for a reason. There are body's ways of telling us that something important is happening that we need to pay attention to. So acknowledging and expressing emotions by opening up to them, by talking about them with others, writing about them, helps us understand ourselves and our needs. And it's important for healthy minds. Oh, sorry, go back one. Oh, sorry. Okay, more technical difficulties here. Oh. Let's see if I can move these back. Maybe my tech person can give me another tip here.
Are you trying to go backwards?
Yes, but I can't see my, oh, okay.
Can you, the arrows should work.
Yes. My apologies. All right. Let me go quickly through these. All right, so we're to A in the acronym, which is acceptance. And acceptance is the recognition that things are as they are. We all on occasion spend time and energy worrying about or getting angry or frustrated about how we'd like things to be different. But when we accept that things are as they are, it allows us to redirect that time and energy more productively on ways to cope and adapt. Accepting a diagnosis of melanoma doesn't mean giving up or not pursuing treatment. What acceptance does is reduce the suffering that comes from struggling against it. All right. The L in the health acronym is for living in the present. This is one way to counter the stress that comes from living with uncertainty about the future. It's what I call shifting from the what ifs to the what is, a shift away from trying to predict or worry about what might happen to focusing on what's happening now. And when we get caught up in a never-ending stream of worries, we miss out on much of the richness of the present. We get distracted or preoccupied. If we can fully engage in what we're doing in the present, we can act more effectively. The T stands for take control of what you can. And while there are many aspects of living with melanoma that are out of one's control, there are things that one will continue to have control over, and focusing on those things is helpful. So for example, being an active and informed participant in your care, engaging in preventative practices, staying connected to friends and family, doing things that are meaningful to you. These are things that you have control over, though they may be more difficult to do than they used to be. We also have control over the attitude we bring to a situation. Thinking about, what do I want to stand for in the face of this disease? Or what can I do to help myself today, is another way of focusing on what's in your control. And finally, the H in the acronym is for helping others and accepting help. And there's strong evidence that sharing one's life with others and receiving support from family and friends enhances the ability to cope. So in the spirit of support and accepting support, there are many resources for help and support throughout one's cancer journey. And I've listed a few of them here. There's individual and family counseling. And in this age of COVID, there are many more counseling resources now that are online or that are virtual, making counseling, I think, more accessible now to people than it has been in the past. Counseling can help people express their emotions, normalize what they're experiencing, and find ways to shift their thoughts and behaviors in order to reduce their distress. Support groups are also available both in person and online. And I think they offer the special benefit of being able to connect with people who know better than anyone else what you're going through. So when you're talking to other people who are dealing with cancer, melanoma in particular, there is much kind of wisdom and information that can be shared and gleaned in those groups. There's also peer-to-peer programs, and AIM at Melanoma offers one, connecting people with others who are dealing with similar diagnosis and treatment, and can be another really useful source of support and information. There are also structured programs, one of which is mindfulness-based stress reduction. That's an evidence-based program that offers mindfulness training to help people with stress, anxiety, and pain. And there are internet resources. Some of the websites here offer information not only on the medical aspects of dealing with cancer, but also the mental health aspects as well. So to summarize, living well with melanoma means turning up the lights and seeing all aspects of your life that are still there on your stage, though they may have been overshadowed by cancer. It means reminding yourself that you are more than cancer and that you can make choices to stay connected to those other things on your stage that bring you satisfaction and enjoyment, so that you're not just living your disease, you're living your life. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Sanger. That was a fantastic presentation. I'll let our audience know if they have any questions for Dr. Sanger. You can feel free to put them in the chat box. You know, one question I thought I'd start off with, Dr. Sanger, is for patients that have never been to a psychologist, can you describe what an appointment's like and what might be helpful for them to bring with them or to think through before meeting with a psychologist?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think meeting with a psychologist or a counselor for the first time can be a scary proposition. And so I think it's important to know that that person is there really to hear your story. It's not about analyzing or telling you what to do or not to do, typically. It's about hearing your story, finding out what aspects of your life, of your dealing with your disease has been difficult, and work as a team to find ways to manage those things. I think the one thing that people can do to prepare is to kind of think through what it is that they think is important for the counselor, the therapist to know, and what goals, if they have specific ones, they want to address in the counseling process.
Great. That's really helpful. And do you think sometimes is it helpful to bring someone else with you? Just is it helpful to come by yourself?
So I have people do it both ways. I think some counselors perhaps vary on their view of that. Some may prefer to talk with the individual who's the focus of counseling. But for me personally, I've had individuals bring a family member, bring a good friend, particularly to the first session when they're feeling a little bit nervous perhaps, and want to make sure they're remembering to tell me everything that is important. So I'm flexible with that, and understand that bringing a support person can be not only helpful to the individual seeking counseling, but that person can be oftentimes offer a useful perspective and information as well.
Great. Well, I find your advice just helpful for everyone, for general life, but especially for cancer, just to really focus on, what can you control, keeping a positive outlook. And I think it's interesting that everyone's unique, right? And appreciate your thoughts on this, that I think patients can deal with anger and frustration differently, and probably even someone that's maybe, I'm just thinking of for caregivers, how a patient has responded in the past. Sometimes with cancer, they may respond to those setbacks very differently.
Sure. Yeah. I think there's few stressors in one's life that compare to cancer. And so, right, whereas a person may have developed ways of coping with the day in and day out struggles of life, being hit with a diagnosis of cancer is a whole nother matter. And I often have people who say to me, I've never talked with a counselor before. I've never experienced anxiety or depression. I'm usually a rock when it comes to handling stress. And now I feel like I'm kind of falling apart, and I don't understand why. So yes, cancer is a whole, because of it's unpredictable. There's a lot of uncertainty. It's chronic. It's a very different kind of challenge than what many people have experienced to that point. And you're right, people have individual ways of coping. And I think where that becomes particularly challenging is in families where perhaps the individual with cancer copes in a different way than their caregiver or their partner. And that can be the source of tension and strain, and make coping as a family all the more difficult. And it's not to say one way of coping is right or wrong, but that they're different. And so understanding how one copes and respecting each other's coping styles, finding ways to kind of mesh them in a way, I think is a challenging but ultimately fruitful task. The other thing I might just add about that is that I was reading a study not long ago about how caregivers and individuals with cancer, and I think it was melanoma actually in particular, manage uncertainty and the challenges of living with the diagnosis. And one of the things they found was that while both patients and caregivers felt the effects of uncertainty, had emotions around that, they often didn't share that with each other. It's as if there was this idea of this kind of protective buffering that was going on. I don't want to tell you about how I'm struggling with this because I don't want to upset you or burden you, and kind of likewise. And so I think sometimes those things can go undiscussed, and that can create, I think some challenges as well. So back to my kind of importance of emotional expression, being willing to not only express emotions for yourself, but perhaps willingness to share that with your caregiver, your partner, so that there's kind of a chance for mutual understanding and mutual support there.
Oh, great. Yeah, I think that's so helpful to think through and really just reflect on, I think, as we deal with cancer and its, unpredictable nature. Just looking through some of the comments, I think patients had some pointed out other great things that, coping with cancer and COVID has been so challenging during this pandemic. Someone else had pointed out the challenges with their wife seeing cancer treatment ads on television. And that's so true. I mean, just those unexpected reminders and things, that all those challenges.
Yes, and knowing that, yeah, and I almost probably every client that I talk to, particularly over the past year and a half, talks about both those things, right? The cues, the triggers, if you will, of seeing things on TV. It's like this experience of once an issue comes into, like cancer comes into your life, then all of a sudden you see it everywhere. You're more attuned to it, whether it's people talking about it or TV shows where that's part of the plot line, or commercials, magazine ads. So it does really kind of heighten one's awareness of that. And COVID has been, another tremendous stressor. And I think one of the ways it's really made coping with cancer difficult is that some of the ways that perhaps people would be coping with their disease, exercising by going to the gym, or seeking out in-person support groups, or just spending time with friends and family. Those things have since have been taken away in large part because of COVID. So I think it really has kind of added to the challenge of coping when those things that you might normally do to manage distress aren't available to you. Church attendance, another huge one that people have talked about. So yes, it's been a particularly difficult stretch to manage both the uncertainty of COVID and the uncertainty of cancer.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight, Dr. Sanger. Really appreciated, your insights, just so valuable. And I think despite all these challenges, I think you gave some really great tips and a lot of good things to think through. And as you pointed out, the AIM at Melanoma Foundation, has a lot of support available for patients as well. So thank you, Dr. Sanger. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate it.